Okay, it looks like we've got everybody on. We're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the press conference by survivors of Ohio State's teen doctor, Richard Strauss. My name is Ed Vasquez. I've emailed all of you documents that we'll refer to today, including the request that the NCAA and Big Ten Conference investigate the Ohio State University. Please check your spam if you do not see those documents, that one email. Attorney Scott Smith, who represents survivors of Dr. Richard Strauss in the Snyder Hill versus OSU action, will start the press conference and introduce to you the 3 sexual abuse survivors of Richard Strauss. Attorney Steve Esty is also standing by if any of you have questions at the end. Attorney Smith, the press conference is yours.
Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon. I'm Scotty Smith, one of the attorneys who represent survivors of Dr. Richard Strauss' sexual abuse in the Snyder Hill versus OSU action. You are witness to the largest and longest sexual abuse scandal and cover-up known to any American university. It has gone on too long. The men who signed these letters before you are seeking recognition by the NCAA and Big Ten of what survivors already know. OSU as an institution is failing to act on its commitment to justice for hundreds, if not thousands, of Strauss survivors, and failing to codify policy changes that will make sure a decades-long reign of terror of sexual abuse like Strauss's cannot happen again. They are also seeking action in line with what the Big Ten and NCAA are bound to do by their policies, and as they did in similar situations of institutional failure at Penn State. Strauss survivors have given OSU more than 2 years to make this right, but all OSU has done is shamefully re-traumatize these victims through delay tactics and broken promises. It's time for some oversight. We want the NCAA to conduct an independent review of why Ohio State enabled this position to sexually abuse so many men for so many years and actively covered up to avoid bad publicity. We defer to the Big Ten and NCAA as to the best course of action in order to prevent current and future student athletes from being sexually abused. Though you will hear the stories of these 3 survivors today, there are nearly 200 names on these letters to the NCAA and Big Ten. Many of the individuals who signed the letters have been fighting for survivor justice for more than 2 years. They've been watching not only as the total number of confirmed survivors of Strauss rose as more men came forward, but as details continue to emerge about how the university administration systematically protected and covered up Strauss and his abuse over the course of so many years, a cover-up which led directly to the immense suffering of these abuse victims have lived with for much of their lives. This continues today through Ohio State's re-traumatization by their delay, their denial, and attempts to have our cases dismissed in court. Despite these shocking findings, OSU does not dispute and in fact verified. Ohio State refuses to take meaningful action to ensure justice for all the survivors of Dr. Strauss abuse. Even the university has acknowledged its fundamental failure to prevent abuse. For example, OSU has declined to publicly support and behind the scenes has fought to defeat House Bill 249 that eliminates OSU's statute of limitations defense in the Ohio legislature. More importantly, although OSU claims they seek restorative justice for the survivors, they are doing everything in their power in the legislature and the courts to dismiss their losses or impede the very objective OSU claims to the media. In March, OSU agreed to settlement with approximately 162 survivors, and in May, it revealed only certain details of that settlement. Yesterday, it settled on apparently the same terms with a handful of other survivors. The compensation offered in these settlements pales in comparison to Michigan State and Penn State settlements for similar institutional cover-ups of wide-scale sexual abuse. Details of these settlements, OSU will not make the agreements public. despite OSU being a public institution and the settlement agreement being a public document. However, we have every reason to believe that it includes no commitment to comprehensive changes in how OSU addresses sexual abuse as an institution. The first survivor you'll be hearing from is John Doe and the Nutter versus OSU complaint. John Doe 3 was a 4-year scholarship athlete in Ohio State football during the 1980s. He earned Defensive Lineman of the Year while at OSU as an academic and also as an academic all Big Ten honors. He is also a survivor of Dr. Strauss' sexual abuse. John Doe 3 states that Dr. Strauss insisted on conducting a full physical on him when he joined the OSU wrestling team, even though Dr. Strauss knew he was the starting defensive tackle on the OSU football team and had just played in a bowl game approximately 3 weeks earlier. I now give you John Doe 3.
Yeah, specifically, where do you want me to go with that?
John, you can tell him your story.
Well, over the course of, there was 3 years that Doc Strauss was around the football team. And, one of the things that people don't understand is that, even though Doc Strauss was the head physician for the wrestling team, but there's 120 some football players on the team. So the head physician, he was always around, but there were 4 or 5 doctors at every practice. And, I don't know what their rotation was. Every day you'd see different doctors, and Dr. Strauss was, around at different times, whatever their schedule was. And pretty much regardless of what ailment you had, whether, anything from a sore throat to a shoulder or neck injury, a foot injury, Dr. Strauss was going to give you a full physical regardless of what the ailment was. And I guess when you think about it, when people go see the doctor for whatever reason, how many times is that doctor going to give you a full physical? And with Dr. Strauss, it was pretty much every time. I can't remember exactly, how many times I saw Dr. Strauss. I'm thinking somewhere around between 15 to 20, maybe more. Pretty much it was a full physical every single time you saw Dr. Strauss.
John, what do you mean by a full physical?
Well, pretty much what he'd say is, like, regardless of the ailment, I can remember his words saying, well, you know what? I got to check your nodes. He'd check your neck, he'd check under your arms, and then make you drop your pants, and would give you a physical of your genitals.
Thank you, John. Next, we'll be hearing from Mike Schick. Mike Schick arrived at Ohio State in 1988 as a freshman from the state of Michigan. Mike will tell you that the reason he came to OSU to wrestle was because of the coaches Russ Hellickson and Jim Jordan. By the time Mike graduated, he was a 2-time All-American. Schick is also a Strauss abuse survivor. In November of 2018, Mike addressed the OSU Board of Trustees. And in June of 2019, he provided testimony to the House Civil Justice Committee on House Bill 249 to remove the statute of limitations defense Ohio State's hanging their hat on. Here now is Mike Schick. Mike.
Thanks, Scott. First and foremost, I just want to say this isn't easy. I've probably been a part of this longer than most. 3 years ago, just to give you an idea of how I got to this point. 3 years ago, roughly, one of my teammates, and I think we all know him, Mike DeSabato, he's been a friend of mine since we've been in school and talked all the time. We worked with the same company. Called me out of the blue one day and started talking about Dr. Strauss. and shared stories, and that kind of led to reminiscent about what we all went through, and then it led to me speaking to probably 30 to 40, maybe more, of my teammates and getting their stories. And you felt like what we all went through was just the tip of the iceberg. And then next thing you know, there's the investigation, the Perkins Coie investigation that took place. Me personally, I'll just, if I can, I'll give you a quick little snippet as to, I come from a conservative family, conservative town, and right away, my first week on campus, we're thrust into sitting down and doing all the compliance stuff with the NCAA, and then team gear and physicals. And my first week on campus is when I got my first physical and abuse from Dr. Strauss. And I'm not going to sit here and hold back on what took place. I don't think that's going to do it justice. But Dr. Strauss, it wasn't just your typical, I'm going to turn your head and cough and that's it. We all line up in alphabetical order, and then it's your turn to go into this room where Dr. Strauss is sitting, and we just fall in line. And as we're moving our way, you get all the upperclassmen that had gone through this the year before, or the years before. They're kind of doing the catcalls and teasing as to what's to come, and you don't know what's going to come. I mean, just take it as is, and you go in there. Well, you're in a small little room, and Dr. Strauss is sitting on a stool and wheels his way over to you, and tells you, before he does, he tells you to take your pants down. So he's sitting right in front of you, staring right at your privates. And for 5 to 8 minutes, he's sitting there with your penis in hand and basically trying to arouse you. That's what he tried to do. It wasn't just your physical, like he was looking for something. He was basically trying to get you aroused. So for the 5 minutes, it's like you're closing your eyes, you're trying to do everything you can to feel like you're going to put yourself in a different place. That was just one time. I was there at Ohio State for 8 years. I was an athlete for 5, and stayed on there as a volunteer coach athlete as I was going through graduate school. So I was there for 8 years. And it was like Dr. Strauss was the gatekeeper for anything that you wanted. And for me, I'm proud of this. I was a 2-time All-American. When I graduated, I think I had the 4th most wins in the history of the program. And for me to do that, you had to be reliable. And for you to be reliable, you had to be healthy. So I was always in the wrestling or in the training room getting looked at by Strauss to make sure I was healthy and to get clearance to go and wrestle. And every time you're in there, you got the same thing. It wasn't just when you were doing your annual physicals. So it was constant. And on top of that, we had a little pod locker room within the recreation and intramural facility of Larkins Hall. And there's probably 50 lockers in there. And Dr. Strauss was right to my left. Not 2 over, not 5 over. He was right to my left. He was my locker mate, so to say. And, every day he would come down there when we were done with practice, undress, and then go in there and sit in the sauna with us, or shower in open showers, watching us shower the entire time. So it wasn't just getting the abuse. He was grooming everybody and watching who he wanted to watch, and then making sure that when he did see somebody, that he was going to take the liberties that he did for all those years. When I first started doing this, I lent my name to this because other people didn't stand up. Not a lot of people stood up over the course of 20 years and did something, especially the people that you find in the Perkins Coie report. There's athletic directors, there's coaches, there's people that knew that did nothing about it. There were people that brought this to light, but nothing was done. So initially, when we started talking about this, I was, felt guilty. I felt sad. I mean, there was a lot of emotions. And where we're sitting right now, I think my sadness and all that stuff has turned to anger. Because we're 3 years in with this and nothing has been done. And the public is being convinced that stuff is being done behind the scenes when it really isn't. Yeah, there was a group that settled, but it's peanuts compared to the precedent that's been set. I actually looked up, I wanted to see this because we're talking about the NCAA getting involved in using their influence to get Ohio State to do the right thing and to create change. But I wanted to see some of the top violations that have come about, NCAA violations. And one of the ones that first came up was the Ohio State tattoo gate with Ohio State football players. The NCAA stepped in on that, and Jim Tressel lost his job. Terrell Pryor was outcast. I mean, we just talked about the Penn State case. I mean, you can go back and look at the Reggie Bush, incident. Most of these were all football that I looked up, and the NCAA stepped in. There's 1,500 students and student athletes that have been abused by Dr. Strauss. And if I can, here's a list of the damages that have been done. And forgive me for using some horrific language. Anal rape, oral rape, digital penetration, masturbation with the attempt to arouse, groping and genital touching, abuse. So help me understand why when you hear those words that the NCAA or the Big Ten hasn't decided to jump in to do something about this, because we're talking about 1 or 2 incidents with people that have gotten money to come to school, and the NCAA steps in. You have 1,500 documented cases of people getting abused by a doctor that was concealed and allowed to happen for over a 20-year period. So OSU has been unwilling to accept accountability. I'll give you one last thing. I spoke at the Board of Trustees, and it was one of the hardest things to do. The first time that I spoke, I didn't know what to expect, but I'm sitting there in front of the world in a sense, because we had all the news outlets, but I'm sitting in front of all these people that are representing the university. President Drake's sitting across from me. I tell my story, others tell their story. When I'm done, I watched President Drake walked all the way around the table, and the first person he came up to was me. And he shook my hand and he says, Mike, I appreciate you telling your story, and I'm going to make sure that we're going to do something about this. And, I took him for his word. Within an hour or a couple hours after I got out of that Board of Trustees meeting, word got out that Ohio State filed to dismiss this again for a second or third time. And they're filing to dismiss because this happened 30 years ago and the statute of limitations are up. When you hear all these things that have happened to these 1,500 people, my teammates and some of the best athletes at Ohio State, why they're trying to dismiss it, or why they don't want to be accountable and do the right thing, and why others aren't getting involved to help do something about this, it's beyond me. So, I'll leave it at that, but I appreciate you guys allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Finally, we'll hear from Mike Murphy. Mike Murphy is a Strauss survivor who attended the Ohio State University from '87 through 1990. Mike was a pole vaulter and a member of OSU's track and field team from '87 through '89. He attended OSU on a partial academic scholarship and won a Scholar Athlete Award in 1987, 1988. He ended up quitting the team and dropping out of OSU because of Strauss's abuse. Here now is Mike Murphy. Mike.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I would just like to say first, Mike Schick explained many things very well that were common experiences with visiting Dr. Strauss for required physicals. And, I really thank you, Mike, for saying that. And it is spot on. I bring myself here as evidence to the magnitude of this abuse from Strauss. I'm a lower level athlete, if there were such a thing, at Ohio State. As a track player, I was not a full ride scholarship kind of guy. But I think I want to make sure that everybody knows this affected athletes at all levels at Ohio State. As a victim of Strauss's on multiple occasions, we're required to do the more than uncomfortable physicals with Dr. Strauss. And I think Mike said rather correctly, elegantly, if there was a way to say it. Strauss was a huge voyeur as well. We were competitors. We would practice. I was a pole vaulter on the track team. And Strauss would be there often taking pictures of us and then inviting us back to his place to view the pictures. Thankfully, I never took part in going back to his place, but the mere fact that he was there taking our pictures and using it to lure and discovering he was luring people back years later is beyond disturbing. And thirdly, I was a victim of Strauss's as I had a severe hamstring injury during my short time there in pole vaulting. And, I thought I was going to receive treatment from some of the greatest doctors in sports medicine, being that I'm at Ohio State. In turn, I saw Dr. Strauss for treatment on my hamstring and was violated by him during my session seeking treatment from the doctor. So, I'm here again to make everybody understand this is just not a football team thing. This is not a wrestling thing. This is across sports. And I find it incredibly disturbing the decades that it went on. I'm seeking that the university step up and creates some accountability and change. This still affects me today at the family level. I have young children that are college age and wanted to go to Ohio State. Ohio State is perceived as one of the greatest universities you could attend, especially here in the state of Ohio. And I had to openly discourage them from going there. I don't feel that I could trust their safety. It's a large institution. And with my experiences there, I felt it's very easy for very heinous things to get swept under the rug. So my children go elsewhere to college, unfortunately. I would love to see Ohio State restore their reputation to be that great university that I thought it was the day that I had the honor of going there and participating in Division I sports. It was the greatest months of my life when I was living that dream out. But there was a really dark side, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I hope that the NCAA would, in the Big Ten, would help to protect athletes. There were many rules, as Mike discussed, and each season there was a sit down to review the rules. And quite honestly, they made school difficult for athletes while they were trying to hold the university accountable. There were certain things you could and couldn't do. If you were attempting to put yourself through school, there were limitations on where you could work and how you could work, or could you work in season. And quite honestly, it made my life difficult trying to be an athlete on a partial academic scholarship and working to put myself through school. So I think it's time for them to step up and protect the athletes, both of yesterday and of today. And I hope they, with Ohio State, I hope they cooperate and make it that beautiful institution that it was, that it advertises itself as. And, maybe I could see my grandkids want to be Buckeyes again, and I'd hope that I could support it at that time.
Thank you, Mike. Ed, I'll leave it to you to open up for questions from the press.
Yeah, and before I open it up, Attorney Stephen Esty is involved in the Garrett litigation. Steve, go ahead and just say a few words here before I open it up to the press.
Sure. When the Perkins-Coie report came out a couple of years ago, we all thought that after reviewing it and seeing all the major cover-ups Ohio State engaged in over decades, covering up this abuse, we all thought Ohio State would do something to hold itself accountable, for its failure to protect these student athletes. But it's been 2 years now, and Ohio State hasn't done a darn thing. We have not seen any written policy changes, haven't seen anything to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future. And that's the reason why we're asking the NCAA and the Big Ten to step in. Because ironically, sadly, Ohio State, the sexual abuse scandal that went on at Ohio State is not unique to Ohio State. It's unique to a lot of other Big Ten teams, your Penn State, Michigan State, Michigan. In Ohio State, that's 4 out of the 10 teams that have had major sexual scandals. And this needs to be addressed. And the only way I think it can be addressed at this point is for the Big Ten to get involved, the NCAA to get involved and exert some power, because they are the institutions with the power. Because the way Ohio State has handled this, they basically delayed. And right now in the litigation, what they're saying, I guess they've settled some cases for, I think, probably less than 25% of what Michigan State paid to compensate their sexual abuse survivors. And this is re-traumatizing our clients, and it's degrading. And the message that Ohio State is giving right now is that their student athletes who were sexually abused by Strauss, their value as human beings is somehow not the same as maybe a Penn State athlete or a Michigan State athlete. Their message is that their harm is not as real. And I don't understand that, because Ohio State valued these people, valued my clients when they were athletes at the university, and the university was making money off of them. What's changed? So that's the reason why we're asking the NCAA and the Big Ten to get involved.
I'm going to open it up to questions in the news media. Go ahead and just raise your hand. Colleen, I'm going to call on you first. Let me open up your microphone, and Colleen Marshall, go ahead. Colleen, your mic's, okay, go ahead, Colleen.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm wondering how this plays into your litigation strategy. Are you asking the NCAA to actually get involved in the ongoing mediation that you are having with the university? Or do you see this as an effort for the NCAA to take punitive action against the university?
I'm going to let Scott Smith handle that. That's a legal question.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. It's a great question. And Steve, I want you to chime in as well. But no, we're not looking for punitive action. We're looking for action of a positive movement to getting this rectified. Ohio State's not doing anything. They're sitting in their own state where they think they control, and nothing's happening. The legislature is being controlled. We're waiting for the court to issue a decision on a motion, but at this particular point, Ohio State's not moving from its position. We're asking the Big Ten and NCAA to step in and do an investigation so we know it's independent. And OSU is held accountable, because they're not standing up and being held accountable to themselves.
And what we're asking the NCAA and the Big Ten to do is separate and apart from the litigation. It's on a parallel track. But it's not the same thing, because they have different powers. NCAA has different jurisdiction. The Big Ten has different power over Ohio State than we do.
Dan Hope, and then Luann Stoya.
Hi, I just wanted to ask regarding, getting the NCAA and Big Ten involved. What do you think that, those groups, what makes them the right entities at this point to get involved in this process?
Well, Dan, university answers to the NCAA by definition, and Ohio State answers to the Big Ten by definition. They are within their own body. The NCAA is supposed to police the universities of which it has jurisdiction. And the NCAA is in a position to investigate, just like they did at Penn State, just like they've done at USC. The question is, why haven't they done something sooner? These letters are being sent to initiate the investigation by NCAA and Big Ten to actually move forward with an investigation, as if we've had to ask them. In this particular instance, we do, and we are.
And we shouldn't have to. I mean, the NCAA, when you see a scandal of sex abuse going on for decades like this, they should be jumping out on their own accord. We shouldn't have to solicit assistance from the NCAA and Big Ten.
Luann Stoya.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. This is a question for Mike and Mike both. I liken this as sort of a men's Me Too movement. Do you feel that because you are men and that this happened decades ago, do you think that perhaps Ohio State, perhaps NCAA, Big Ten puts lesser value on this investigation?
I can chime in. My answer is I have no idea. History question. I mean, I want to know why they don't put as much credibility with this. I mean, abuse is abuse, whether it's with male on female, like at Michigan State. I mean, I look at this thing too, is would this be different if the entire 350 plus victims were all football players? I don't know. I mean, why it's being looked at any differently? I mean, I would ask each one of you guys to hear all the stories of the people that are a part of this. I mean, when you do it, they're awful. And, it's beyond me why it's taken this long for people to actually want to care. I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mike Murphy, what say you?
Yeah, I would say similar to Mike that, sexual abuse between any parties is inappropriate. And the fact that it's happening at a large institution and happened for decades and it was continually covered up. This happened to be a male doctor on male athletes, but had it been a female doctor on male athletes or a female doctor on female athletes, I don't think it should be any different. The magnitude of this is beyond comprehension that it went on so long, and it continues to be covered up. And that's why I'm here. I'm here as evidence. I want everybody to see this was, it was not a small thing.
Cantelli Franco, and then Jennifer, Columbus Dispatch. Cantelli, go ahead.
Hi, guys. This is more for Scott and Steve. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah.
Can you say whether the letters that were shared, have those actually been sent to the NCAA and the Big Ten at this point? Or are you planning to do that today? Or is it just going on the change.org site as you seek more folks to sign on to that? And then also, can you specify how many of your clients have signed on to those letters?
Hi, Cantelli, this is Scott. Those letters will be sent. They were finalized just recently, so they should go out whether it be today or tomorrow. And the number of people that have signed, to my knowledge of the group that we represent, everybody has signed on. There may be one exception, or there may be more than one exception if we didn't get through to our clients. But everybody that we've gotten through to, with maybe one exception, have agreed to sign on.
Steve, did you, let's go ahead with Jennifer, Columbus Dispatch.
Everyone, thank you. I understand you're also asking the Big Ten to put some conference funds towards supporting victims of Richard Strauss. What would that look like, and what do you understand the precedent to be in that situation and for the conference to take that step?
The logistics on that, I'm sorry, Jennifer, thank you for the question. The logistics on that will have to be worked out with the Big Ten. And if the NCAA steps in, the first step is always the most important step, and that is get them involved and get them willing to initiate an investigation. The remedies from that will flow therefrom.
Yeah, I'm just trying to let them know that I have another question.
And Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think that just like Scott just said, getting them involved will be a positive step in the right direction, and sends a message to other institutions that they've got to make sure this doesn't happen on their watch.
Molly Martinez, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you to those who have come forward. I know this isn't easy, and I really respect your bravery here. My question is about Jim Jordan and what the relationship was with Dr. Strauss, and whether or not any other people in the program had any sort of wind of this.
Molly, is your question, did Jim Jordan know?
Yeah, or how much of this was covered up by the people as it was going on?
Well, let me try to answer that question. Jim Jordan is just but one individual who was at the university during the time of this constant and repeated sexual abuse by Dr. Strauss. He was in the wrestling team. He was in the coaching staff. He was in the locker rooms. Now, there's enough individuals who have come forward that talked about who knew and who this was reported to. It's not just Jim Jordan. There are other individuals. you have coaches such as Russ Hellickson. If you've read the Perkins Coie report, and if you haven't, I urge you to do so. It will list many of athletic trainers, coaches, assistant coaches who reported this and nothing occurred.
Yeah, I think the Perkins Coie report identifies 50 to 70 individuals at Ohio State who knew what was going on, and Ohio State failed to take action.
Mike,
Can I
so
say
if you want to
something?
address that question also?
Ed, can I say something?
Yeah, Mike, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike Schick.
The screen's sort of frozen.
Okay. I'll come back to Mike. Does anyone else have any questions?
Ed, can you hear me?
Yeah, Mike,
Yeah,
go ahead.
you're good now.
Sorry, I was coming in and out, but can I expand on that a little bit?
Sure.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Ohio State has, or they're neck and neck with Texas as having the largest athletic department in the country. I think there's 18 women's sports and 18 men's sports. And I mean, you got to look at the number of coaches on each one. I mean, there's hundreds of coaches that are at Ohio State. I went to Ohio State because of Russ Hellickson and Jim Jordan. Jimmy was my assistant coach for 5 years. Love the man. And, you know, he's going to have to answer to, you know, what he knew and why he knew. And that's on him. But what I think what upsets me and what frustrates me, and I get it because it's newsworthy. You know, I spoke in front of the House Committee for HB 249, and I did it twice. My parents did it once. And that whole process for me was awful because it turned into a political thing. I mean, if anybody on that panel would listen to all the stories of each one of us that went through this abuse and knew that there was cover-ups, that it would be a slam dunk they would vote for this bill. So over the course of this time, you know, through speaking in the House Committee and then bringing Jimmy's name into this, it's trying to pull in this political thing, and it's not fair. It's not fair to the abuse victims. It's not fair for anybody that was a part of this. And, you know, forgive me for saying it that way, but, you know, this isn't about Jim Jordan. This is about the fact that Ohio State knew about Dr. Strauss, knew that he was abusing athletes for 20 years and did nothing about it. And now we're sitting here today and they're trying to dismiss this and do nothing about it. So please, let's not make this about Jimmy Jordan. I get that he's high up in politics, but this is not about him.
Any other questions? Some of you have your mics unmuted. Go ahead and just jump in with questions.
Yeah, this is Colleen Marshall again. And I guess my question is to the two mics. I know you say that this is not about Jim Jordan, but it is about the fact that there was institutional knowledge with Jim Jordan, with Russ Hellickson, with all of these coaches, all of those years ago, who some of them now seem to be questioning your credibility. So when you hear coaches who say they don't remember anyone complaining about Richard Strauss, and I'm thinking specifically, I have to say it, Jim Jordan, because he has called into question your credibility, claiming that no one ever came to him and he was unaware of it. Is it possible that a coach in those locker rooms at that time could have been unaware of what was happening with Dr. Richard Strauss?
Can I take that?
Yes.
So my credibility is pretty intact, and I got 350 plus other people that would back that, because we all know the truth and what happened. It's not going to take one coach or two coaches to say that it didn't happen, because, you know, 350 people didn't all of a sudden just get together and start creating a lie. Right? It happened. In regards to the knowledge of stuff, look, we were And just to give you an idea, I mean, we're practicing 3-4 times a day, and we're a part of an environment that was, we were in a deviant locker room. We were in an area that catered to everything that we were a part of. I mean, probably stories that you don't know, and I know Mark Coleman shared this in his Sports Illustrated issue, and on being interviewed. There were a number of times that people were being watched and in our showers, and were watching us, and were pulled out of the locker physically because they were doing that. So there's more knowledge of people doing this from coaches, and why they don't want to speak up and say it, that's on them. I don't know why, but if you want to sit down with all the other John Does and put them behind a black screen and ask them, they would all say the same thing. I was there for 8 years. I was kind of between several generations of athletes that came through the wrestling came through the wrestling team. So it wasn't just like a small group of people. Jimmy was my coach for 5 years. So
one more question.
Colleen, can I give you a slightly different perspective on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yes.
I mean, some of the things that happened right out in the open. The voyeurism things and Strauss and pictures of athletes that were, lowly clothed. That was happening right in front of everybody. And the physicals that were required, and as the team rotated through taking physicals, and Mike did a great example of you're lined up alphabetically and you go in the door when it's your turn. And then if it were like track, we return right back to the track and continue our workout for the day. And the carrying on amongst us athletes about what just happened. It's inconceivable that coaches didn't know something was wrong no matter what. And I have coached many kids as a parent and with the schools my kids have gone to, and they put us through training to be alert for things like this. And one of the most simple statements that they teach you in training is that if you see something that looks wrong in terms of an adult interacting with children, it probably is. And you should do something and investigate about it. And there's just no way that these things went on in the open like they did, as often as they did. And I can't believe all the different sporting venues that it happened at. But looking back, it should have been incredibly obvious to anyone in the story.
Hey, Colleen,
Yes.
when this story broke a couple years ago, July, the article that came out, I think it says Congressman, former OSU assistant wrestling coach turns a blind eye to sexual molestation or sexual abuse and molestation. By saying that no one ever came to me and said that we told them about being sexually abused or we were molested, I don't think those words were ever even used back then. I don't think we knew what the heck that was. But that doesn't discount the fact that things were happening and people knew.
Let me get John Doe 3. John Doe 3, if you could unmute yourself and just give us some of your last remarks here before we leave.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I can say is that, on the football team, it was much different because, like I said, he wasn't the head doctor. But he was one of the doctors that was around that was treating the student athletes with whatever their ailment was. But when I was part of the wrestling team, it was much different. Because Dr. Strauss was the head doctor and he was the only one there. Dr. Strauss wasn't in the football locker room. He wasn't in the showers with the football players. But on the wrestling team, he pretty much did what he wanted to do because he didn't have any oversight. He didn't have anybody else watching him. And I think that was a big difference with the, things that went on in the wrestling team. Not that things didn't happen, in the examining room with him at the Woody Hayes facility, but it was much different at Larkins.
And Attorney Scott Smith, you want to wrap this up, get the last word in here and wrap it up?
Yes, thank you, Ed. I appreciate everybody for being interested in this. We're pushing this as hard as we can. We'd like to have it resolved. We'd like to have Ohio State become accountable because they're re-traumatizing our clients every day by this delay. And I'm not so sure that it's not designed that way. OSU is no stranger to this kind of sexual abuse. They had it with their diving coach. They've had it with the marching band. They're not making changes, and we'd like to see changes made. If you have any questions in the future, don't hesitate to contact me or Steve Esty about this. Thank you, Ed.
Scott, let me give you a question here from Cantelli Franco again, and it's just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
I'm just going to read it. It says, you said these requests are a separate track from the litigation, but the letter suggests that there be a fine that's bigger than Penn State. So could you clarify the earlier comment that the aim is not punitive?
Well, what the NCAA is designed to do is enforce its policies and rules against the universities. They're not paying attention to this, and we're asking them to do so. We don't consider what the NCAA does as penal. If there is penal ramifications and remedies for what they find, then so be it. That's the consequences of OSU's actions or inactions. It won't affect us in the sense that we are on a litigation track and the court's going to control what happens in our case. The court's going to control how this is going to turn out. And it has nothing to do with what the NCAA does. But the NCAA has a duty to step forward and investigate, at least in our opinion.
I'm looking at one more question that came in, so just bear with me. Let me read it here. Okay, so the last question is to the two Mikes, Schick and Murphy. What would you say to the Big Ten commissioner, sorry, if you had an opportunity to?
Protect your athletes. It's that simple. The NCAA has lots of rules to make sure that the universities can't recruit athletes or give them special favors above and beyond that to others or within guidelines. I think this is a great example of they need to use their ability to reach through to Ohio State and protect yesterday's and today's and future athletes.
Ed, I didn't hear the question. Can you say it again?
What would you tell the Big Ten commissioners if you had an opportunity?
Get in a room with all the abuse victims and hear their stories, and I think it would take care of itself. You don't need to hear anything else. I mean, my opinion. I think that to me is what kept me going in this, just because I have friends that this has really affected. I mean, myself included. And to anybody that's got a heart and I mean, and to see this, they wouldn't need any more guidance.
Okay, again, thank you everyone for attending the press conference. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and email me. I'll get them over to the attorneys or the participants as well. Again, thank you everyone. I'll get the video